All right, we are in our new series. We're finishing the introduction to our new series today. New priesthood, new hope, new covenant, the book of Hebrews. Previously, what we covered in the book of Hebrews, by the way, for those of you, I've had a lot of questions regarding the introduction that I've given thus far. And the largest question so far is the chart that I showed, the thematic development of Hebrews. So I made some copies. If you would like a copy, I'll go over it again on the board. If you would like a copy of the chart so that you can hold one in your hot hand as we go over it again and delve into it a little bit more. Some people told me I went a little fast. I was a little rushing in that, and maybe I was. So we'll pause, we'll say Selah, and we'll contemplate this particular chart as the message goes on. So what we covered in the past 2 weeks, I told you 2 weeks ago why my great Aunt Hilda, great missionary, 40-year missionary to the Jewish people, and my mentor, believed that Hebrews was the indispensable book of the New Testament. That got my attention, and here we are, one commentary later. Here we are as, and by the way, speaking of the commentary, I brought 2 copies. That's all I have right now. I've got more on order, but there are 2 copies of the book, and they are in the back of the room. If anybody wants to purchase one today, you're welcome to do so. I only have 2 right today. I'll have more next time. We talked about the date of composition last week. The date of composition must be dated for a variety of reasons, which you can watch the video and see what the reasons are. But the date of composition is the mid part of the 7th decade of the first century. That would be 63 to 66, the mid 60s, prior to the Roman Revolution, or on the eve of the Roman Revolution, the Jewish revolution against Rome, that results 4 years later in 70 AD in the destruction of the temple. So these are fraught political and theological times when the gospel, when the epistle, the letter to the Hebrews was written, and the date really does matter, as does the audience. We determined for a variety of reasons that the logical community recipients were Jewish Christians or Jewish believers in Yeshua, who lived not across the diaspora in Rome or in Alexandria or in any other city in the Roman Empire, but just adjacent to Jerusalem, either in Jerusalem itself or more likely in the region of Judea, adjacent to the environs of the holy city. We spoke of the purpose to definitively demonstrate the supremacy of Jesus Christ, Yeshua HaMashiach, in both his identity and his ministry, his person and his priesthood. You know, some of you may be wondering, why spend so much time introducing a book? Because it is understanding what the book is about, taking the big picture and understanding what the big picture, what the purpose, what the structure, what the theme is, that will help us when we are navigating the pathways and the trails and the woods of the book of Hebrews. So again, why was it written? To definitively, once for all, demonstrate the supremacy of our Messiah in 2 ways: person and priesthood, identity and ministry. Helpfully for us, the author of Hebrews tells us what the main point is. In the very center of the book, chapter 8, verses 1 and 2, he says this, and we should remember that this is the main point. The main point, and what has been said, is this: we have such a high priest who has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens. In other words, a minister in the sanctuary and in the true tabernacle, which the Lord pitched, not man. So the supremacy of our Messiah in comparison to the high priests that exist under the Levitical system. One cannot be supreme in a vacuum, only in comparison. And the only thing that our Messiah's priesthood can be compared to biblically is the Levitical priesthood, the high priesthood. So Yeshua is in his priesthood, in the location of where he ministers, in his sacrifice, in so many ways, as we will see in just a moment, as we look at the argument. Now, maybe I went a little too fast last time regarding the argument. We'll slow it down a little bit. It bears repeating. This is the argument, 3 slides, 1 sentence. God's new and superior revelation discloses that with a new and superior permanent priesthood, every word is important there. New, superior, permanent priesthood. Necessarily important, verb, comes a new and superior permanent law, which yields a new and superior permanent hope. New, superior, permanent. Priesthood, law, hope, by which to relate to God. So, stop. The way we relate to God now, through our Messiah, through our high priest, through the new covenant, is new and superior. It is not a continuation of an inferior old means of relating to him. It is sure, there's some continuity, obviously. Same God, we're saved the same way by grace through faith, but the object of faith is defined much more specifically and with clarity, and how we relate through our object of faith, our Messiah, to God, through the new covenant, through his priesthood, is superior. That provides a new and superior permanent guarantee. Guarantee of what? You may ask. Thank you for asking. A guarantee of a new and superior permanent covenant. New and superior to what? Abrahamic covenant, it's old, but it's permanent. Unconditional, there's no end to it. Davidic covenant, it's old, but it is permanent. There's no end to that. The Noahic covenant, that's old, really old, but that's also continues. The covenant that is being compared over and over again is the Mosaic covenant and the new covenant. We can only function under one system based upon new and superior promises. Yeah, I'd like to know, what are the benefits? What kind of benefits? You go from one job to another, and you're looking at the health care system, you're looking at the insurance, and you look at the benefits package. Which job has a better set of benefits? Very clearly, when we're comparing covenants, the new covenant has a better set of benefits, new and superior promises that are established through a new and superior sacrifice. How could it not be? How could the benefit package not be better when it costs so much more? Right? If you're spending $200 a month on a health care system, right, on your insurance, you know, okay, that's not going to be all that amazing. If you're spending $1,200 a month, that's the bells and whistles. That's Cadillac, baby. You want that package. Right? Because it costs more. It's going to be better. It's going to necessarily provide more. And that's what the author of Hebrews argues. This package costs so much more than the blood of bulls and goats. It costs the blood of the high priest, of our new high priest himself, who is also our sacrifice, our Messiah, offered by a new and superior permanent priest within a new and superior sanctuary. Our Messiah does not function within the tabernacle or the temple after it. He functions in the real deal, in the true presence of his Father. So the structure of this, I mentioned last week that this is kind of a hybrid structure, kind of a quasi-sermon, quasi-letter. It's really very interesting in that it contains features of both a sermon and a letter, and it's chock full of comparisons and metaphors. What is a metaphor? To help you understand the argument better. That's what a meta is for. But comparisons, I'm here all week. Comparisons and metaphor, because let's face it, the author of Hebrews was writing a letter that was designed to be read orally and heard orally, A-U-R, orally by the congregation. So it contains tricks and helps and memorable turns of phrase and description, like comparisons and metaphor, to help with understanding. It is filled, as a first century Jewish sermon, it's filled with Hebrew scriptures. Main ideas are based on a few Old Testament scriptures. The main ideas that are based on a few Old Testament scriptures are illustrated with additional Old Testament scriptures. Several more Old Testament scriptures tie the main ideas and the illustrations together. And it's laced throughout with old-fashioned Jewish passion for the Lord and for his revelation. What kind of comparisons might we find? One of the major terms that you'll see multiple times is the concept of better. This is better than what you had. This is better. In this area is better. That area, that's also better, okay? It's like watching a ton of commercials for new and improved products. All right. Now we get to the graphical representation. Now when I say things like, those of you who have your chart, you can either watch it on the screen or take a look at your chart. You have down at the bottom, now the axis of the chart is, the vertical axis is the chapters. It's 13. So you see 1 through 13 going right across. So we follow down 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Along the side, along the horizontal axis, you see the themes. And there are several themes. The theme of Jesus or Yeshua as Son. You see the theme of the new high priest. You see the theme of the new covenant. You see the theme of the tabernacle. You see the theme of new sacrifice. You see the theme of faith. You see, it's not a theme, but it goes throughout its resultant warnings, okay, because of these subjects, these themes, there are resultant warnings that go along with you not following and getting with the new program. And then, of course, the main theme throughout the book is down there on the bottom in red, or I'm not sure what, yellow on your graphical representation. It's yellow because my printer ran out of red when I printed out yesterday, but nonetheless, you can see. So if we just look, let's just look first of all at the bottom two lines across. The bottommost is the theme of Jesus' supremacy. That's the main theme. And you see that the main theme It travels through 2/3 of the book. It's almost there all the time. Just enough time to breathe, to turn a page, and then that theme is resounding again. You see that theme stops in the final portion of the book as we move from theology and demonstrating the argument about the superiority of Jesus to what are we going to do about it. So you don't have to argue the main theme anymore. That's why that bottom line from 10, the second half of 10 all the way through the end is blank on Jesus' supremacy. It's already been established. Now, we have that second line from the bottom in blue. That's a series of warnings. Hebrews is famous for its warnings passages, and what a treacherous set of passages to interpret, how difficult, and none of us agree. Well, we're going to see how those resultant warnings, there are 5 of them, and you can see them right there. They're scattered throughout the book. Even when we leave the theological section and we go to the final end where we're dealing with the practical application, even there we see warning, one final warning. So 4 warnings are in the theological section and a final warning in that applicational section. Now, if we look at what these colors mean, now looking at Jesus the Son, new high priest, new covenant, tabernacle, new sacrifice, and faith, these main themes or these sub-themes of Jesus' supremacy, we see that they can be introduced. The introduction is on the screen, is in that kind of a wheat. In fact, I got a better, maybe a closer, you can see. There, maybe that's a little more helpful. Okay, maybe that's helpful. I don't know. That's helpful. Not sure. Let's stick with this one. We see the wheat is the introduction of the theme. So, for example, that little crisscross wheat-colored or yellow on your page right there. Where are we introducing things? We're introducing in chapter 1. We're introducing right at the beginning Jesus the Son and the concept of new high priest. And as you can see, wow, that's going to be talked about a lot for 10.5 chapters. We introduce new sacrifice and faith in chapter 2. That's the next set of themes to be introduced. And then in chapter 7 and chapter 8, we get an introduction of new covenant and tabernacle. So you see faith, new sacrifice, tabernacle, new covenant, new high priest, Jesus. They're all introduced at a certain time. The way to think about these maybe is to use Star Wars music. Everybody knows Star Wars music. Most everybody knows Star Wars music. It's familiar to us, right? And we know that, for example, the main theme, speaking of main theme, we have at the beginning, the very beginning of the first Star Wars movie, and we're going to hear this theme throughout not only the first film, but we're going to hear this main theme is going to play throughout all 9 pictures. But let's just control ourselves and just stick with the good 3 films, the first 3, and talk about those. So everybody knows the main theme. Bam, ba, 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 right? You don't only hear the main theme at the beginning. You hear it at various times in the program, various times throughout the film, and actually throughout the films. You'll hear that main theme, but you're introduced to it the first time. There has to be a first introduction for everything. You're introduced to it at the beginning of the first Star Wars movie. Then you have Leia's theme, right? Dun 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 dun, dun 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 dun, dun 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 dun, bum ba dun dun dun. Right? You familiar with this? Right? You understand my musical lingo? So we move from the main theme of Star Wars. John Williams moves right into and he introduces a whole nother theme, Leia's theme, right? Then we have, of course, in the second film, we have the introduction of a theme that is worthy of the antagonist, and that is the Imperial March, right? Ram, bum, bum, ram, bum, 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 bum. I don't need to see Darth Vader walking majestically through a corridor with his cape flowing behind him, looking all malevolent and black, to know that if that theme begins to play, I can expect to see him. Even if I don't see him right away, I know bum, 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 bum. I may have an establishing shot of an Imperial ship. It may look at some of the Imperial troopers, but eventually I know as long as that Imperial March is playing, I'm going to see Darth Vader, right? Luke's theme. Dun, da, 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 dun, dun. Dun, da, 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 da. Right? Familiar? Now, that's an interesting thing because when you hear it, it's introduced at the beginning of the first Star Wars movie, and it plays throughout in various combinations with the other themes. And then when at the end of the film, spoiler alert for 1977 Star Wars, okay, for those of you who haven't seen it, at the end of the film, when the heroes are marched down the aisle as they can presented with their medals, we hear the advanced development of that same Tatooine, two moons, two suns theme, the Luke Skywalker theme. Dun, dun, dun. But it's not ya da 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 da. It's bum ba da 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 bum ba dum bum bum. Bum, ba-dum, bum, bum, and it's a martial sound, and it eventually turns into bum, ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum, bum, 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 ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum, bum, bum, and we hear the Star Wars theme. Okay? So throughout any film, Star Wars is just a really good example because it has some very well-known and defined thematic themes, musical motifs. And John Williams weaves the motifs of Luke and Darth and Leia and all the others and the main theme. He weaves them all together, and that's why that album was such a huge seller back in the 70s. We all wanted it because we all wanted to hear that incredible music over and over and over again, and that's why they still use the same themes even for the TV program. You still hear some of those same themes woven through. Okay, so that's what's happening. When John Williams introduces a theme, he will then advance the theme. It will grow. This is like any symphony, any concerto. It will be introduced. Beethoven's Fifth. Bum, 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 bum. Bum, 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 bum. That gets your attention. That's an introduction. And then he will advance it. Da 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 dum. Ba 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 ba. Everybody. Ba 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 bum bum ba. You know the words. Da 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 da. Right? So, and then there is the reinforcement stage when you are super familiar with that theme, like the Star Wars theme or like the Beethoven's Fifth, and you can sing it, you know it really well. So it was introduced, it was advanced, and then it's reinforced. You take some new ground with that theme, and you now make sure you can hold on to that territory. You take that ground, you hold on to that ground, and then you can develop it. So you introduce it, you advance it, you reinforce where you are, and then take off from there into development. Who knows how it's going to be? Well, in Star Wars, you see how it's going to be. That main theme and Luke's theme and Leia's, they all morph into a final Star Wars, triumphant Star Wars main theme sound. So that's how these ideas are being explained. So let's look at, go top to bottom now. Jesus' son is introduced in chapter 1. It is no advancement, no reinforcement, goes straight to development. Okay? It is then in chapter 3 and 4, it is reinforced. So it's introduced, it's developed, and then that ground is held for a long time. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10. The concept of new high priest, introduced right there at the beginning, dropped like a hot potato, but then brought back to be advanced in 2 and 3. It is developed in 4 and 5, dropped at the end of 3, brought back for 4, dropped for 5, advanced and developed all the way then through 10. New covenant, we don't touch new covenant. That theme is not touched at all. That's like Darth Vader is not getting his theme, Imperial March, until the second movie. That's what's happening here, okay? You're establishing the other heroic themes, and then we've got to introduce another theme, and we wait until chapter 7 to introduce it. Then we develop it, then we reinforce it. All the way, and don't touch it from 11, 12. Don't touch it. But then 13, we can knock it out. How about tabernacle? Tabernacle is not touched until the second half of chapter 7. It's finally introduced, developed, reinforced, and then dropped, not brought up again. Jesus as the new sacrifice, introduced in chapter 2, not touched. Chapter 5.5, or the second half of 5, it is advanced. 7.5 is advanced. Second half of 8. And in the meantime, you see those little blank spaces. It's just touch, 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 and then boom, big giant 9 and 10, big giant development reinforcement. And the concept of faith, it's teased. We're going to tease it in 2. We'll briefly mention it in 3. We'll advance the idea, not in 4 or 5, but we'll touch it in 6. Chapter 10. You see, oh, there it is, advanced again, and then developed and reinforced. Boom, boom. And then it's in the part of the practical application of the book. So as we look across, and as we look up and down at our chart, whether we're holding the handheld charts or whether we're looking at the screen itself, if we look at the chapter, tell me which chapter is if these themes were chocolate chips, which chapter would be the cookie that was the chippiest? Which has the most themes jammed in there? What do you think? Is it chapter 1? Any takers for chapter 1? Is it chapter 2? Is it chapter 3? No, chapter 4. Oh, look at all that white space in there. I don't know. Chapter 5 has a lot of white space in there. All right, so that's 5 chapters that way. Let's go backwards now. Is it chapter 13? No, there's only 2 themes in chapter 13 that's even touched on anymore. He's already said his piece. Chapter 12, only giving you a warning for that one, right? Chapter 11, it's only one theme, faith. That's the famous faith passage that everybody loves. It's the only passage that people know in the book of Hebrews. Right? Faith is the hope of blah, 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 blah. And we have the hall of faith, the great hall of faith. Yeah. Okay, everybody knows that one, but there's so much more going on. So it's not those last 3. So that leaves us 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. If we had to vote, which is the busiest chapter, looking all the way down, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. How many of you would go for 6? Let me see your hands. 6? 7. Chapter 7. How many of you would say chapter 7 has got the most action thematically? Chapter 8, the most action. Chapter 9, how many of you would say? Chapter 10, how many would? Okay. So actually, 9 and 10, as you can see, are the 2 busiest. And that makes sense because as the theological argument comes to a close, as we give way in the second half of 10 all the way to the end of the book, to the application, it makes sense that all the motifs, all the themes he's been weaving in chapter 1, chapter 2, and let me introduce something else here in chapter 4, and now he's got all, again, like plates, okay? You spin one plate, two plate, that's impressive, right? But then you got them all spinning, and by the time he's in chapter 9 and 10, wrapping up his argument, he's bringing all of those themes to their conclusion, wrapping it up. So it's going to be very dense. The thickets are going to be very dense. The woods will be dense when we get to chapter 9 and chapter 10. Hooray for us, we have 1 through 8 to prepare us as one theme at a time, or in some instances 2 themes at a time, are introduced, and then additional ones are developed and introduced along the way. All right, that's enough time talking about all of that, I think, right? I think for sure. All right. Let's talk about the theology of this book. Theology, this is a theological book, so you can't get away from theology. So the question is, what is it going to teach us about each area of theology? What are we going to explore theologically? And don't get upset, don't get tense, don't get nervous the moment that somebody mentions theology. You're like, okay, this book is mainly theological in its contents. Because what is theology but simply what we believe and why we believe what we believe? So sure, I know it would be more exciting maybe for us to talk about the adventures of Peter and the adventures of Paul in a historical narrative. But this is really where Hebrews is where the rubber meets the road. You've already had the historical narrative. You had Gospel of John before that. You've had a lot of narrative. Now it's time to get into the theology, which is how then shall we live? Nice to understand the adventures of those who came before us and the various different stories. But now we need to understand the meaning behind these things. So what is it we truly believe, and why do we believe it? And so we see the text of the book of Hebrews contains 70 names, titles, descriptions, and assertions regarding the Father. Who is he? He is known as the covenant God. I have the Lord, capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. That's really not one. It's Jehovah. It's the name of God. It's the covenant God. We mentioned God's covenant earlier with Abraham, and of course, new covenant is going to be all through and through this book. And so he's the covenant-making God. He is the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, who also has reached out to bless all the families of the earth. We find out how that happens through the Abrahamic covenant. That's ultimately through our Messiah being of the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the ultimate punchline, if you will, of the blessing that God will extend to the world. So our Father is the Lord. He is the majestic, the majesty on high. His nature, the majestic nature of our God, his royal sovereignty, in other words, is on display here. His identity is highlighted over and over again. He is majestic. So if you want to think, O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth, if that wants to be the soundtrack that's going through your mind through some of this, that's fine. Or majesty, worship his majesty. These are wonderful thematic songs that go along with the theme. Our divine creator. We were not created by chance. We were not created with no reason behind us, unlike anything that Carl Sagan I know he's not resting in peace, but nonetheless, Carl Sagan and his followers and his protégés say we have a creator who created us, a divine creator. Our God is our creator, created us with purpose and with intent. We see also that God is our divine judge. The Father is the divine judge of all. Of course, how could we not point out the issue of Father? And Father, in contrast to Son, and in confluence, working together with the Son. We're going to see our God in this way. Very interesting. And of course, covenant maker, which I've always also alluded to with the term Lord, and divine communicator. God is not the divine watchmaker, creating the watch, winding it, and then going and doing something else, watching Netflix for the next, 50,000 years, whatever. No. God is directly involved in his creation. And because he wants us to understand who he is and what his plan is, he is a divine communicator. Many more other titles. There's 70 in all. We're not going to spend all time on 70. Let's go to the Son. We spend time developing his Messianic identity. What does it mean to call Jesus Messiah? What does it mean for Yeshua to be our Mashiach? Furthermore, can our Mashiach also be deity? Is that not breaking the categories? Is that not mixing apples and oranges? How can the Messiah, who was a man, also be God? The book of Hebrews is going to help us develop our understanding of just how much man and how much God, which, spoiler alert, 100% is the answer, is comprised in our Messiah. We focus on his identity as high priest, which you already picked up, I'm sure, by now. And along with high priest, you get 2 for 1, perfect sacrifice. So when we think about the theology of God the Son in the book of Hebrews, we will see quite a variety of important areas that we, especially as a Messianic congregation, really need to focus on. There are some Messianics who are really confused regarding the concept of Trinity or triunity, the concept of Jesus being as much God as the Father. How could they both equally be God? Isn't he in some way deficient? Subordinate does not mean sufficient, by the way, right? And because there are in any hierarchy, there are subordinates and there are superiors, but that in essence, in identity, our Messiah is deity. Now, when we think about the Holy Spirit, Hebrews has a lot to say about the Holy Spirit, about the Ruach HaKodesh. He's the testifier through the gifts that he distributes to his church, to individuals within the church. He is author of Scripture, at least the divine partner in that partnership. He is the one of whom believers have partaken. He is eternal, and he is the source of grace. Regarding salvation, this book discusses the accomplishments of our Messiah as high priest and perfect sacrifice, vis-a-vis what it means for us in our salvation, the identity, our identity as believers and followers of him, participants as we are in our own sanctification, and the eternal life that is given to us once we place faith in that high priest and perfect sacrifice. Regarding the church, it tells us our identity as the church. Who are we? Why are we gathered together on a regular basis? What is our responsibility as followers of Yeshua? What is our responsibility as the corporate body of our Messiah? What is our responsibility as a local congregation? It talks about the leadership of a congregation, and it talks about how timely for us in this congregation, for Dale, for Diane, talks about the sacrament of baptism, talk about end times. it displays, or it develops, it discloses rather, that our present era is the last days and the consummation of the ages. So, in other words, if we buy what the author of Hebrews is selling, he's telling us that we're in the last days. We're in what he calls the consummation of the ages. And that leads us to what's coming, the Messianic kingdom, the age to come, after this consummation of the ages. What is the relationship of the second coming of our Messiah to the Messianic kingdom, to the age to come? Will there be divine judgment? What good is there being? I'd established that the Father is established here as divine judge. What purpose is a divine judge if divine judgment is not going to be wrought? For whom? We'll find out. And it speaks of our future inheritance and our blessing. Regarding Israel, oh boy, there's a lot here. Obviously, it's called the letter to the Hebrews, right? That was thematically assigned to it. It wasn't original, but the content of the book is pretty much news from the Jews for yous. And so we see the relationship between the church and God's covenants with Israel. God made covenants with Israel, and he did. All the covenants in the Hebrew Bible are made specifically with Israel and Judah, except for the Noahic covenant, which is made with all the living thing, all things that are living and breathing, mankind, the animal kingdom, etc. But all the other covenants were made with Israel. What is the relationship with the church in these last days? So what is the relationship to God's covenant regarding the Mosaic covenant and the church, the new covenant and the church, the Abrahamic covenant, the Davidic covenant and the church? And it's very, very strongly adamant that Jewish believers do not lose their Jewish identity once they trust in the Jewish Messiah. Jewish believers in Yeshua absolutely retain their identity. And finally, we go through all of the feasts. Oh, look at all these feasts that are touched on in the book of Hebrews. Passover and Pentecost and trumpets and Hanukkah and the day of it. Hanukkah is not even in the Torah, but yet it is nonetheless, it is touched on in the book of Hebrews. Day of Atonement. And of course, Shabbat. All right, we come to a conclusion now. Our introduction. Next week, be ready. You're going to see the superiority of the Messiah as divine revelation. Chapter 1, verse 1. If you want to get a head start, the two commentaries are in the back. There'll be more next week. You want to study this chart, study the chart. You have any questions to ask me, I'll be available after the service. So, speaking of which, let's move now to our announcements.